My name is, mi nombre es Alberto Hernández, follow Tato's, Soy Associate Director of the Center for Puerto Rican Studies and also the Chief Librarian and Archivist. We're very proud and honored to present tonight a book about one of my most beloved Puerto Rican New Yorkers. One that when one mentions his name or nickname in a conversation of any kind, rest assured a smile will spring from one of the lips of one of the members of the conversation. That's my experience. Our honored poet was also a very special human being, witty, kind, a good listener, an observer, and a special raconteur of amazing but true stories of the people around his orbit. His self-assurance and willingness to speak out on behalf of others, including some of not so fortunate, and describe the environment, the barrio, the island, the city, the streets, the alleys, the characters, always make us feel at the end that the story has a good ending. After some 6 or 7 months of organizing, browsing, picking up suitcases full of papers from Ruth Laviera, one is really surprised to see how much energy Tato had. I mean, everything is written down, the charts that he creates, the connection he makes with people and places and things. He's an amazing projection of his way of thinking in two dimensions. In a chart, you'll have big charts, and say you open thing and think that doesn't make sense, but when you start reading about it, it's just he's making connections of ideas, people. He's writing a proposal for some health organization or helping somebody do something, or writing curriculum for a school. It's amazing. He grows all the time, and one is always the energy, the tenacity, and the spirit of himself. He grows, and I know he will continue to grow and guide us. Some of us indeed are blessed of being touched by Tato, but luckily for us, all of us, he left a trail and some serious combination of words and music for the future. Before I leave, I had to mention Ruth Laviera. I met Ruth last year. Thanks to her persona, her love for Tato, and we owe her, tonight we owe her to her. She donated the collection of all the papers. She's being instrumental in reaching out to people, searching people, identifying people, getting me names. Most of you, I know your emails and phones. Thanks to Ruth's memory. She can memorize those numbers. She still have she doesn't have an iPhone. She has a little phone. And she started, it says 212, and she remembers, oh, not William Lewis, no. And she will remember the name. So, Ruth, we thank you so much.
Thank you, my brother.
Yes. Without further ado, I want to introduce you our moderator for tonight, our colleague Javier Totti. Thank you.
Hi, good evening. I'm Javier Totti. I'm the editor of Centro Publications, and this is a great day for us, as we're very proud to present this book. Before anything, I want to thank Edwin Melendez for having the vision of pushing the book. He's our director. I also want to thank William Luis and Stephanie Alvarez, who are the editors of the book, for bringing all of these scholars together and having the vision also to have this book on Tato's critical work on Tato's work. Vanessa Perez for agreeing to be the commentator for the book tonight. And of course, last but not least, Ruth Laviera, who kept us honest and kept us on track when we did ready. And when we stalled, she gave us the push and the pull to continue and to finish this work. We're going to follow a format where the discussant of the book, Vanessa Perez from Brooklyn College, will speak first. And then the two editors will address you, will talk about the book. Stephanie Alvarez from the University of Texas, Pan American, and then William Lewis from Vanderbilt University. And then after, each will speak for around 15 minutes, and then after we'll open it to the public. And I have the thankless job to keep them on track. I'll be the Ruth tonight. Keep them honest. With further ado, Professor Vanessa Perez from Brooklyn College. Whatever is better for you.
Stay here.
It's fine. Is it okay if I stay here in the back? Yeah. All right. So
they can't hear you.
They can't hear me in the back. You can?
Yeah. Put this closer.
The mic closer. Okay. So, wow. I want to just start by thanking the editors of this volume for all of the love and vision that they put into this amazing anthology that's so much more than just an anthology. I was really impressed when I picked it up on Thursday. I did get proofs of the book sooner, so I did have an opportunity to start reading it before Thursday, but it's different looking at proofs in, online versus holding the book in your hand. And so I was really impressed with the way that this anthology is so much more than just a collection of essays, which is what I was expecting it to be. I was expecting, the typical 10 to 12 essays by a group of scholars. But this anthology really commemorates and honors the great late Puerto Rican and Nuyorican writer, thinker, intellectual, poet, and activist, Tato Laviera. Congratulations to them. So the thing that really came to mind as I was reading the book with great force is that this is an act of love. Love just came through in this volume so strongly. The love that the co-editors feel, and by extension the contributors feel, for Tato Laviera and his work comes through passionately in this volume, and it's what I think sets it apart from a lot of other collections of essays. The first time I heard Tato Laviera recite his poetry live was actually in Houston at a Recovering the U.S. Hispanic Literary Heritage Conference in 2008. Arte Público Press has published Tato Laviera's work, and Tato developed ties to Texas over the years, in addition to his work with Arte Público and the Recovery Project, through the project that he worked on with the Cosecha Voices Project at the University of Texas Pan American, where Stephanie Alvarez, one of the editors, is a professor. It was Stephanie who developed this project with her colleagues there, and there's a chapter of the book that's dedicated to the project, and I'm sure she can tell you more about it. At the time, I was starstruck to see and hear Tato Laviera perform his work. Although I was already a professor at Brooklyn College here at CUNY, I'd only lived in New York City for a year at that point, having moved here from California in 2007 to begin my academic appointment at CUNY. At that point, I had not yet had the opportunity to meet Tato Laviera in New York. Over the years, as I became more integrated and more connected to the New York Puerto Rican community, I soon realized that Tato Laviera was an integral part of the community, someone who was accessible, regularly attended cultural events, where I had several opportunities to chat with him. He was an important part of the community, not someone who distanced himself, and that mutual love and respect for his craft as a writer is what comes through in this book, and it's part of what I want to focus on tonight. So I've been asked to say a few words regarding the volume, which I'm happy to have the opportunity to preview and share with you some initial thoughts. I'll start by picking up on some of the ideas that the co-editors present in their opening essays. In the foreword by Stephanie Alvarez, she writes about the birth of this project and how it was initially going to be a collection of previously published works by Tato. On Tato. I'm so glad that they decided that there was a need for additional scholarship on Tato Laviera and Latino authors in general, and decided to publish new essays on Tato Laviera, essays that have not been published before. The editors noted, and I'm quoting here, the importance of Tato's life's work and the need for more scholarly books that focused on single Latino authors. Because of this, they commissioned both seasoned and up-and-coming scholars previously unpublished essays on Tato's writing. That's what has led to this very timely book on new critical approaches to Tato Laviera's work. It's true that there's a dearth of single Latino single studies on Latino authors available. This might be in part because of the current publishing market that's moved away from publishing books that focus on a single author. This is something that I know a little bit about because I'll take this opportunity to plug my book for one moment. I've recently finished a book on Julia de Burgos that will be coming out this fall. And when I was first searching for a publisher for the book in 2011, several of my colleagues in the field of Latino studies told me that I was lucky to be working on such an iconic figure as Julia de Burgos. I would have no trouble finding a publisher because she is so well known. But what I learned is that she is well known to us, not necessarily to editors at university presses. It's significant that we have a press like Centro who recognizes the value of a book like this. In his introduction to the collection titled Introduction, Births and Rebirths of Tato Laviera, William Luis offers the reader an understanding of the elements that make up what he refers to as Laviera aesthetics. These elements include, and I'll go through some of the elements that he highlights in the introduction. They include the use of language and Laviera's concerns about expressing himself in different languages, Spanish, English, and Spanglish. This theme is explored in several of the essays included in the book. For example, in Edric Lopez's essay, Spanglish, Laviera's El Ni de Aquí Ni de Allá, Language in 14 Movements. Religion is another element of Laviera aesthetics. Luis notes that religion is expressed as part of Puerto Rico's Catholic or Christian denominations. However, it is also an essential belief system Africans brought with them to the Americas during the period of slavery and continues to present with all followers regardless of race. Love is another important element of Laviera aesthetics, Luis notes. While romantic love is a theme explored in his poetry, Laviera also shows love for those common people who have become marginal and dispensable in society. Luis notes that they serve as a source of inspiration for his poems. Music is another element of Laviera aesthetics. Luis notes that not only do the poems contain music, but they are also about music. They are sonorous, and music is also a cultural expression. Luis notes, and this is a quote, "Music is what immigrants and exiles carry with them when traveling abroad and setting roots in a different society and culture. Music is a newcomer's connection to the past and establishes a link between the home and adopted country." And there are several essays in the collection that focus on music and sound as a way to approach Laviera's poetry. The New York City tapestry is another important aspect of Laviera's aesthetics. The poetic personas he creates all speak to aspects of the city that became his home, personas such as Tito Madera Smith, Jesus Papote, and Lady Liberty. Luis does an excellent job of going through the way that some of these characters reoccur in his work. And then, of course, race is another element that we can't ignore in Laviera's aesthetics. Exploration of race, both in Puerto Rico and the United States, are important in his work. The theme of music in Laviera aesthetics is explored in Francis Aparicio's article titled "The Poet as Ear Witness, Reading Sound, Voice, and Music in Tato Laviera's Poetry." Using sound theory, Aparicio notes that this is a quote, "If writing in the Western tradition has reduced the spoken word to a word without voice, Laviera's poetry inverts this effect and indeed returns sound and audibility to poetry," end quote. The theme of race is explored in Larry LaFontaine Stokes' essay, quote, the title of which is "Speaking Black Latino-ness, Race, Performance, and Poetry in Tato Laviera, Willie Perdomo and Josefina Baez." LaFontaine Stokes notes that each of these three performance poets are highly visible and well-recognized exponents of poetic traditions centered on orality, but restructured according to their insertion in other discursive cultural models, such as poetry of resistance, youth culture, and postmodern dance performance art. All three highlight a New York City experience in rich transnational, multi-ethnic, and multiracial dimensions. La Fontaine-Stokes notes that their creative work is extremely revealing of the complexities of race, gender, and ethnicity within contemporary American culture. There are also other essays that focus on race, such as the essay by Antonio Dominguez Miguela, who looks at the Afro-Caribbean connections between Tato Laviera and Luis Palés Matos. More often than not, contributors to the collection address various aspects of Laviera aesthetics laid out by William Luis in his opening essay. Israel Reyes' essay Barrio, Body, Beat, Tato Laviera and the Holistic Rhythm of Mestizaje looks at the way that Laviera heals and loves his community through writing and orality. Juan Flores' essay looks at the way that Laviera weaves race and language in his poetry. And so the book is, so these are just some of the highlights, some of the essays that I really found compelling. There's so much more to this book than just these. I wanted to give you a little taste of some of the essays that you'll find in the collection. But like I said, the book is so much more than just the essays, the critical essays or critical approaches to Tato Laviera. There is a section in the back of the book that, that includes some of his previously unpublished poetry, which I think we'll get to hear some of that tonight. His play, The King of Cans, which I was so glad I had an opportunity to see performed here a couple of years ago. Just a year ago or 2 years ago, perhaps, at Taino Towers, 2 years ago. So that's included in the collection. There's also an interview that's titled "The Testimonio," where we hear Tato Laviera speaking, using his own words to talk about his work. So it's really an amazing collection that's so much more than just a collection of critical essays. So I was very pleasantly surprised by that, as well as photos. There's a collection of images in the book, which I think really helps this anthology be one that would be very user-friendly for a classroom. I feel like it's set up very well to teach Tato Laviera in a classroom in a much more in-depth way than perhaps inserting a poem here or there into a syllabus, or a critical, an essay that maybe speaks about a collection of authors. This really helps us to bring Tato Laviera into focus. So I want to close with just a couple of thoughts that I had on something that struck me right at the beginning when I was reading Stephanie Alvarez's foreword to the book. She notes that as a student, as a graduate student, when she was studying in a Spanish department, Latino literature was not something that she had a lot of access to. It wasn't something that she really had the opportunity to read very much. I went to graduate school in California. I had a very similar experience. We were probably in graduate school around the same time. But there's something that she said, that she writes in that opening, that resonated with me, and I'll read that quote first, and then I'll talk a little bit about what that brought to mind for me. So Stephanie Alvarez notes that in graduate school, when she was exposed to Latino literature and had the opportunity to read it, she soon realized that because she didn't have the opportunity to read it and study it in graduate school, she'd been denied the opportunity to study the language, culture, and literature of Latinos in the United States, and therefore deprived of the prospect to affirm her identity and place in society. And so when I was reading that, it really made me think of Tato Laviera's language and of something that Walter Mignolo wrote in his book, Local Histories, Global Designs. This, I think, stood out for me because as a scholar, I am very interested in specifically writing about language and bilingualism. So Walter Mignolo writes, when he thinks about writing about Latino literature and the use of language in Latino literature that incorporates both English and Spanish, he calls it bilanguaging. And he calls it bilanguaging as a way of knowing and of living emerging from the detritus of colonial and national expansions. It could contribute in the struggle, bilanguaging can contribute in the struggle to reconvert subaltern memories from places of nostalgia to places of celebration. And I'll close with one more quote by him. He goes on to elaborate a bit further in this same book that love is the necessary corrective to the violence of systems of control and oppression. Bilanguaging love, or this what is often referred to in this book as Spanglish by some of the authors, or code switching, he refers to it as bilanguaging. Bilanguaging love is the final utopic horizon for the liberation of human beings involved in structures of domination and subordination beyond their control. So Stephanie's, from the very beginning, the foreword where Stephanie writes about the significance of Tato Laviera's work for her, and then in later essays where so many of the scholars focus on Tato Laviera's use of language, it made me think of this, and I come back to this idea of love as being really what drives this whole project. So those are my thoughts for now.
Thank you, Vanessa. Now we'll move to comment by the two editors of the book, and Stephanie Alvarez will comment.
Well, I would like to start by first thanking El Centro and Edwin Melendez, and in particular Javier Toti. Yes. Toti worked very hard to pull all of this together and make this happen. And I would also like to thank Ruth, because the book, yes, it would have been published eventually, but we are here today on this date thanks to her and esa fuerza que ella tiene para empujar y hacer que las cosas se hagan y se hagan bien, ¿verdad? And I want to also thank El Centro, like Vanessa was saying, for starting this press, because there is a real need to open up avenues to publish on Puerto Ricanos, Nuyoricans, and Latinos, not just artists and writers, but all of those experiences that exist in the world that really need to be documented and often are not, because precisely what Vanessa said, there are a lot of people who work on this but just don't have the avenues to publish it. And the Centro not only is doing that, but is opening up a space to do something, like Vanessa was saying, that is not typical for an anthology, knowing that our work is not in the typical Western type of vein, and that we need to open up those spaces, not just for the work, but our type of work. So thank you to El Centro for that. So I really thank Vanessa, and I really love the way that you start with speaking about the fact that this was done with a lot of love, and end with that, because it really is what drove all of this work. You know, every single contributor of the book admired Tato profoundly and loved him very much. All of them. There's not one of them that was new to knowing about Tato. Everyone just truly, truly believes in him as a genius, you know, a genius of the letter, you know, so. And Vanessa reminds me of a story that he would tell often when he recited poetry at universities, and some of you may have heard this, but he talks about this little kid who comes up to him after a poetry reading and says, he calls him a little Urkel with this bow tie, and says, I looked up the word Boricua in the dictionary, and you don't exist. So Tato said, he was like, oh, this kid. So he went to the park and wrote a poem right there and said, he wrote a poem for him. And the poem, you know, it starts off with, he would recite, "We are a people who love to love. We are a people who love to love. Respect." And so it is very interesting that you would talk about it that way, you know. And so I think that love is a very common theme in all of his work. And I think this is what people really admire about Tato's work, is that, you know, he is a deep intellectual, but at the same time, you know, there are moments of anger and frustration in his work, but what comes out most is love. You know, he never hated anybody. He never talked bad about anybody. You know, even in those works where he is criticizing his contemporaries, like José Luis González or someone, that is done with deep respect and love, you know. And so the other thing that to me comes across, he has one quote that I often cite, and that is, "La lengua es la ametralladora de la libertad." Right?
Wow.
Yes, la lengua es la ametralladora de la libertad. And I always tell my students, I'm going to put it in my office, right? I want someone to paint it on my office wall. Because like Vanessa was saying, you know, this all comes from this deep desire to want to know more about our communities and our poets. And so this book originated, as she said, as this idea to just collect essays. And so when I met Tato because I published an essay in the Centro. And Toti gave him a copy of the journal, and Tato had some people read it to him. And so then I kept getting, for like over 2 months, these handwritten letters in my mailbox from Mr. Laviera to call him. But I didn't know this man, and so I was like, I'm not calling this crazy man. And finally, insistía, okay, ya, lo voy a llamar, and he wants to meet me, right? So we bring him to University of Texas Pan American. And at that time, he's un loco, right? So in one day, he does a reciting with me, poet critic recital. He does a recital, and then he does a workshop, all in one day for like nothing, of course, no money at all. I mean, there was a tiny bit, but nothing like he deserved to get. Then I told him my idea of doing this anthology, and he said, "Well, William Lewis, I want William Lewis to have an essay in that anthology." You know how he is; he always wants to put his like friends together, right? You know. So I get in touch with William, and he's like, "Yeah, bring me down." So I bring him down, and William's idea is, "No, let's do new essays." And I was like, yes, we need that, because when I was writing my dissertation and chapter was on Tato, what I found was there was so little just written on Tato. There was essays about Tato and so and Tato and within the context of whatever, but not on Tato Laviera himself. So it's not just publishing a book on a single author, but it's about publishing even essays. It's hard to get done. And so we had this vision to do that. And, you know, I contacted a lot of people that I knew admired him, and everyone was more than happy to contribute. And, you know, I remember Frances Aparicio, she finished her essay and she said, "Thank you for returning me to poetry." She hadn't written about poetry in so many years, you know. And so this is sort of the origin of that. And so I'll talk a little bit more about his teaching work. You know, I write a lot about Spanglish, like Vanessa, and, you know, Tato's Spanglish aesthetics and how he merges those to really create a whole new transcultural vision of what it is to be not just Nuyorican, right, but Puerto Rican and Latina in the United States. One of the essays is actually about how he uses the Latina voice in many of his poems by Susan Campbell. But he used to say something in his workshops, and everyone who knew Tato knew he was always doing workshops, right? It was not a craft that he wanted for himself, right? It was a craft that he wanted to share, and he was a mentor to so many poets, you know? And so he would, he developed this sort of chorus that he would say, "Cada palabra es un universo. Cada sílaba es una expresión. Cada letra es un sonido sin fin." And this would be how he would start. to capture the students or fellow poets into the idea of the word, and how the word was the center of all the poetic craft, right? And not just the word, but the components of that word, right? And so that would be the centering of it. But then he would go on, and it wasn't just the word, it was how you said it. Because we all know Tato's poetry is not meant to be read, it's meant to be recited and sung. So I'm gonna do with you his exercise that he would do with our students at the University of Texas Pan American, and I'll explain a little bit more what he did. So this is what he would say. You gotta say it correctly.
You gotta say it correctly.
Okay, now he would say that was horrible, okay? You gotta say it correctly.
You gotta say it correctly.
Dance the word out.
Dance the word out.
Dance it.
Dance it.
Dance it.
Dance it.
Put form to it.
Put form to it.
You gotta say it correctly.
You gotta say it correctly.
Dance the word out.
Dance the word out.
Dance it.
Dance it.
Dance it.
Dance it.
Put form to it.
Put form to it.
So I'm going to share a quote with you that one of the students says. Tato came to UTPA, Texas Pan American, that 2007 and did a workshop. And he left after having met my husband, José Luis Martinez, who co-wrote an essay with me in the book. And Jose is a migrant farm worker since the age of 7. He's been working in the fields. And South Texas, and this is the tip of South Texas. I know everyone thinks Texas ends at San Antonio, but for our south, there is a whole other world. This is the area that Gloria Anzaldúa writes about, okay? So he learns the story of Jose Luis and his 7 brothers, who all worked in the field since the age of 7 years old, but all went on to receive a college education, 6 of them at the University of Michigan. And he just can't believe this. Because talking about not knowing about your own experiences and the Latino experience, Tato really had no idea what a migrant farm worker was. And certainly that children, Latino children, Chicano children in particular, were doing this work. So he leaves, and here's this story in Mexico, which was the first time he had been in Mexico, right? And he couldn't believe that at one point he has 1 foot in Mexico and 1 foot in the United States, over the river, you know? And to him, this was like an embodiment of his entire life's work, that he was standing in the middle of these 2 countries. And so he has the idea that he wants to work with the migrant farm workers, that if he can get them to write about their experience, that they could find their voice. And then, with that voice, hopefully empower themselves to achieve anything they wanted in life. You know, so one student says, first day of class, it was crazy that we got to write right away. He made it easy to come out of the shell and just write down our thoughts. It didn't matter if it didn't make sense as long as we wrote them out. Something was to come out of our writing that would inspire us to keep writing without fear of what could be said or how we said it. I honestly wasn't convinced that he would get me to write down my story, and so I was wrong by the end of the course. I was truly amazed with what I wrote and was able to share with my friends and family. So, and I don't think that this is exclusive of this student. I think there were thousands of students that he made this happen with, not just in a class, but in a 1-hour workshop, right? I mean, he also did our workshops with middle school students who at the beginning of the day would say nothing. They would just sit there like this, oh my God, don't scream at me, right? By the end of the day, they were racing to the microphone to talk, you know? And, you know, I think that, you know, that what Tato was doing is really, really found in one of his poems. And I think this comes out through all of the essays here. And that is this idea of conciencia, right? And he has a poem called Conciencia that appears in Mainstream Ethics, Ética Corriente, which a lot of people don't talk about that collection, but really is one of the most political in the terms of his attack against the United States, right? Previously, he's dealing with the Puerto Rican, Nuyorican experience, then the broader Latino and even ethnic minority experience. But in mainstream ethics, he just like lets them have it, right? And so I'm gonna just read a little bit of that poem before, closing it out. And I read this because one of the students, Belinda, at the end of her testimonio wrote, quisiera que con mi voz de experiencia los demás se dieran cuenta del esfuerzo que tiene uno que hacer para poder sobrevivir. Mi lucha ha sido informar e intentar de enseñar lo duro que es la vida por ser migrante. La lucha no es solo de uno, es de muchos de nosotros que hemos trabajado en la cosecha, intentando ganarse la vida con el sudor de su frente. Juntos podemos unir nuestras voces y hacer que la gente nos mire de otro modo y que nos aprecien y nos valoren. And that was a student, a freshman student by the end of his class that wrote that. And this is a part of Tato's conciencia, which I think embodies his poetical theory, but the part that a lot of people don't think about is his activist and pedagogical approaches. And this is what the poem says. Comiendo el mango agrio de ilusiones, la cáscara podrida carcajada del progreso. Hasta aquí llegan las llagas de la búsqueda. A ver si cerramos los ojos tan siquiera un momento. A ver si un nosotros verdadero, un nosotros poderoso, un nosotros lleno, un nosotros amoroso. A ver si un nosotros humano alzamos las voces constantemente a ritmo de insistencia, resistencia. Un nosotros crítico que abre la boca, que no se estanca. Un nosotros que declara, somos el mar de nuestro destino, somos la lengua de nuestras acciones. No tememos al miedo, sabemos que el sin hablar nos oprime. Que caiga lo que caiga, como caiga, cuando caiga, que caiga donde caiga, el silencio nos mata aquí. Inundémonos con la mirada fijada, con la pelea externa. Pónganse ciegos, no oigan la soledad, háganse soldados de su destino sin parar. La lengua es la ametralladora de la libertad. Háganlo para el futuro de nuestros hijos. Oigan, no se achanten, ganaremos. Gracias.
Thank you, Stephanie. And now, last but not least, William Luis.
For me, it's a pleasure to be here and to be with Vanessa and Stephanie, and with you. And normally, in our profession, in academia, we tend to read what we want to say, but I feel that since I've arrived in New York a couple of days ago, I feel that Tato has been with me, and although I'm somewhat disorganized, I've been more disorganized since I've arrived. So it's like Tato saying, "Chavate," and so I'm gonna let go, and we'll see what happens. But I want to start off by thanking our Holy Trinity, Edwin, Toti, and Ruth.
Yes.
And it's not gender specific either, so you can figure out who's who in that relationship. And Alberto as well, of course. But and I've been thinking about the anthology and about how it all came together and why it came together at this particular moment. And we tried very much to put the anthology together and to make it work, and for some reason or other I was traveling or something was going on, and Stephanie had her commitments, and so it just couldn't come together. And it dawned on me that it couldn't really come together. It wasn't ready to come together because it had to go through a whole process. And that process was Tato's process. The anthology had to go through the same process that Tato also underwent. And it had to be done after we had the entire process before us and behind us, so we can reflect, or so I can reflect on what the whole process was about. So we did start the anthology when Tato was with Stephanie in Texas, and I got involved, and we saw the anthology go through that process, and it went through the other process of when Tato was homeless, and Tato got back on his feet, and then Tato became sick again, and Tato, as we know, was in the hospital, and so it had to follow that process. Mm-hmm. And then the anthology had to be put together by people scholars who knew Tato's work, but also knew Tato. And we've all known Tato, and Tato has shared himself with us, and so we all carry a part of Tato with us, and we know specific parts of Tato, and I guess as a collectivity, we can bring our full sense of who Tato was, because he is all of us in pieces together as well. And these scholars that write about Tato, normally when you write about an author, it doesn't really matter whether you know the author or not, and sometimes it's even better when the author is not around to joder and chivar and fastidiar. And so, but with Tato it was different, because we all, and as Vanessa started out saying, we all love Tato, and it's very different when you love somebody and you write about them. And so we did bring together a group of scholars, but scholars who also love Tato, and that makes it special. That makes it a different kind of work, because it's a work that creates a certain distance of analysis, but it also brings a certain intimacy of friendship and love that he also shared with us. So we can't really get away from that. When we write about Tato and his work, we are also sharing in who Tato is and was and will always be with us. And so as part of this whole process of putting together the anthology, it also became clear in when I wrote the introduction, which is entitled The Life and Resurrections or Rebirths of Tato Laviera. And it had to do with cycles in the life of Tato, but also cycles that are very present in an early poem, perhaps in my opinion, not only one of Tato's best poems, but also one of the best poems written by any New Yorker or anybody in the English language. It's a fantastic poem, and that's Jesus Papote. And in Jesus Papote, you have these cycles of death and rebirth or resurrection, and those cycles are evident in different stages in the poem. And I'm not going to go into the poem now. I don't think it's the right time, but I just wanted to point out to you how the cycles in the poem mirror the cycles in Tato's life. And so when you look at Tato and the birth and rebirth or resurrections that Tato has undergone, they were already present in that poem. And that poem, in some respect, kind of mirrors what the future was going to bring. It was kind of like foretelling what was going to take place in the future. And so it inspired me to get to know Tato and to get to know his poetry more intimately, to try to understand things about himself, but also about myself. And that's the wonderful discovery about being with Tato and Ruth and the families, that I've learned a great deal about myself. And that's not supposed to happen. But in this case, it did. It did, whether I wanted to or not. It happened, and I feel much richer for it. But it was a cycle. It was a cycle that I was also became a part. I was caught up in this cycle also, in the same cycle that we were all. Those of us who were with Tato in the last stages of his life, we were all in that same cycle, and so. But the wonderful discovery for me is how those cycles were already present in that particular poem, and also in other poems. And I think that what that poem has, and I really ask that you read it and read it carefully, and then think about Tato, and then think about how those cycles are also in our lives, because that's the wonderful thing. Because it not only opens up literature, his writing, and how it functions in his life, but then you also look and see how much we also learn from his poetry, and how much it also affects us intimately. And I've also began to think about my own particular cycles and the cycles that I undergo. And we all go, and we all fall, and we all get up, and we fall, and we get up, and every time we get up stronger, and with more determination and more strength. And this is what we also saw in Tato. And in that respect, well, Tato has been an inspiration, and he will be an inspiration. An inspiration in terms of his work, in terms of his poetry, but also an inspiration in terms of his life and his presence. And his presence will always be with us. And his presence is one of love, is one of communication, is one of community. Community is a very important word for Tato, for us to be together, to get to know each other, to share. And this is where the power and the strength is for us to come together. And we've learned that, and I've learned that, and as I mentioned, and there are the road is not an easy one. It's a difficult road, but that's okay. It's okay, because that makes us stronger. We don't want it easy. We don't want to just walk down a path with no obstacles. The obstacles have to be there, because the obstacles make us a better person, makes us a stronger person, makes us the kind of person that will lead, and we can also mentor those who come behind us and show them also the word and the path, and what our commitments are, and the kind of dedication that we have to the people who belong to this community. So I want us to reflect on Tato's poetry. I want us to reflect on Tato's life, but I also want us to reflect on our contributions of how Tato lives in us, and what we have learned and will continue to learn from his work, from his poetry, and how we can enrich ourselves and enrich other people who are part of that community. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and now it's your turn. Anyone who wants to ask any question or make any comment, please do so. Yes, Edwin.
Bien. Okay. Well, let me start again. I just want to thank the editors of the volume. On behalf of all the Centro staff, we're so pleased to have this book published. Of course, the force behind the book was Tato to begin with, but Ruth inherited the role of pushing for the volume, and we're very happy. I just wanted to make a comment about why this book is so important to Centro. Okay. When Tato, the last few years of Tato, he was weak, but he had a goal. He wanted to leave a legacy for other younger writers. He devoted a lot of time with youth. He put together various plays for young people to participate and start their journey into literature and theater and so forth. And Tato always was talking about what to do next, and leaving a collection for Centro was one of the things he wanted to do. Of course, he didn't get to do that before he passed away, but it was clear his daughter Ella and Ruth actually helped us complete that dream of his. And now for us it's a beginning, okay? Many of you didn't know before tonight that Tato transferred that collection to us. His family and him wanted to do that. Tato also has some unpublished work that we need to figure out how to make that available to others. but this is just the beginning for us. In order to honor his legacy, we need to develop this collection. And this book, as other books that we have published recently, Tanto Pura del Press is about one of our most sought after collections. The book about Helena Valentin's memoirs has been translated to English and to Spanish. They all have a theme. They're recovering our history, and they are doing it through people that actually represent the best in our community. And Tato is one of those. For us, we need to now put all that material online for people to reach out from Puerto Rico to California and beyond. We need to develop the resources. We're interviewing family and other colleagues and so forth for a documentary that we hope will come to fruition soon. And Richie and Alberto and others here are working on that. So this is just the beginning for us, and it's no better starting than the launching of this volume that so much honors Tato Laviera. So thank you for doing this.
I just want to make a comment off of that, and that is that Tato wanted this book to be published by El Centro. There were lots of possibilities for it, but Tato wanted this to be published by El Centro, and William and I agreed. And the reason is that we really need to support our centers and the people who from the day one have been the ones supporting the community and working to preserve the history, the way that Edwin was speaking about, And I believe that this will be the first of more books to come on Tato. And part of that is because of the archive. And Centro does such a wonderful job with the archives. And Alberto, thank you for all of that work, and your staff as well. And I really believe it's the first of many to come. Now, when we were going through this last round of edits furiously, I was so happy to reread everything, and it really cemented for me Tato's work and his really genius behind his craft. And when he would teach our students, I would tell them, one day your kids are going to come home with a book, and Tato's poems are going to be in that book. And you're going to say, I took class with that guy. And that already happened to one of, not the students, but one of the faculty members. And, 100 years from now, we're still going to be reading Tato. Well, not we, but others. I'm certain that is the case, And, this book, is a collection of essays on Tato. In the academic sense of the word, in which you would expect, as Vanessa was saying. We have essays by Juan Flores, Franz Aparicio, Larry Fontaine Stokes, Israel Reyes, from William and myself, and others as well. But at the same time, we are publishing unpublished work of Tato. We are publishing The King of Cans in one version. There are many versions of King of Cans, and those will be at the Centro archives. So it's work that is to be done, is to look at all of those different versions and to write about. We also have published 4 poems that I like to call tributos, because there's a poem about Celia Cruz, a poem about Sonia Sotomayor, a poem about P.D. Thomas, and Frank Bonilla, And at the same time, we close, the essays with a testimonio by Tato. And it's a unique testimonio in that we collected all of the interviews that Tato had ever done and published, and wove them all together to tell a sort of history about his poetry and the events that influenced his poetry. But we took out all the questions and left it just in the I and the yo, and filled in the gaps with his help, and with talks that William and I had both had with him. And so even though this happened, like William was saying, we had to go through the processes, right? At the same time, Tato read all but one of these essays. He had people read them. And he commented to us too and let us know what needed to be fixed and what not to include. And he also read his testimonio and helped us bridge those gaps as well. And in many ways, we had to publish this, as William said, after Tato had passed away, because it will cement his legacy in a way that probably, unfortunately, wouldn't have happened otherwise. So I know Tato's here with us, and he's very happy. He is thrilled about this. And so I just wanted to sort of give a little more information based off of what Edwin said, and the fact that Tato wanted this published with Centro, and that others of you out there who are scholars or writers to really look at Centro for publishing. And I can tell you firsthand that they do fantastic work, and Toti and all of the staff are just really genuinely loving people who want to see the work happen. So I want to thank you all again.
Please. Hi, I'm Angel Roman. My name is Angel Roman. I used to be in the same group with Tato, the Friends of the Centro Library.
Oh.
And so he really loved the Centro very much. And also I shared a ride with him to Washington, D.C. to march. And for about 3 to 4 hours, I hear echoing, soon, 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 bye-bye. Anyway, so one thing I just want to say about him is that I don't know if the volume will have a site where you could hear the poetry, because I always connect it with his voice. So I don't know if that's a suggestion I just want to put out there. And my question to the panel is I don't know how much he studied poetry or he came upon it late. I know he worked for the city and other jobs, and then also did his poetry. So I don't know much about that history, but my question has to do with, I guess, compare and contrast Julia de Burgos, Pedro Pietri, and Tato Laviera. Is there a theme, or are there connections, or are they just stand on their own?
I don't know who wants to.
You can give that to Miguel Algarin, can say the studying, how he started going. The Professor Miguel. Come here, please. He was my brother professor.
Well, let me see. I walked into a class at Brooklyn College, and sitting in the middle of the classroom, there was Tato. God, that was many, many years ago. And I remember that I was impressed by the presence of his mind. So I talked my English department at Rutgers to hire him to teach English, freshman English, and he pulled it off. But what didn't he do that he didn't pull off? And I'm telling you that today I run into people who study with Tato, and they say, damn, I wish I knew. Yeah, well, they should have known that there was one and only one Tato Laviera. God bless him.
I'll share a story that he told me once, and I'm sure he's probably told these to other people. I don't pretend to be special in that I know certain stories, because he liked to tell the same ones over and over again. But it's about the poem AmeRícan, and then maybe William can talk about why we chose this title, right? So one of Tato's, the most anthologized Puerto Rican poem in the history of Puerto Rican letters is AmeRícan. Yes. And he said he specifically wrote it because he felt that America needed a Puerto Rican poem. The kind you can put in a classroom. He said middle schoolers, high schoolers, and that the Puerto Rican obituary was not going to make it into the schools like that, and he said that's the Nuyorican poem, and he say AmeRícan doesn't compare to Puerto Rican obituary. But it's tame enough, but controversial enough for the schools, you know? And I think that's, you know, that tells a lot about the difference between Tato and some. He always knew how to play it, you know? Like he knew how to pull anything off. He knew how to play it politically. How not to make people mad, but make them mad enough to want to do something about whatever it was, you know? And so in that sense, I think this is what really sets him apart, you know? And the humanitarian aspect of his poetry, which is really, his poetry is really universal, you know? It's AmeRícan poetry. It's not Nuyorican, and it's not Puerto Rican, and it's not Latino or Latina. It's all of those. And at the same time, it's very mainstream. Like he said in Mainstream Ethics, Ética Corriente, we are the mainstream, right? Our experiences are the mainstream. And it's just finding that point in there, you know? And there's actually an essay in the book that compares him to American poets like Walt Whitman and Langston Hughes, and puts him into that tradition, which is so important to do, you know?
And you know, it's a lady here, Liz Colon, knew my brother before he was a poet, when he was a community person. I would like her. She got a lot to say about my brother. You know.
Just say something about this question.
Yes.
Thank you, Ruth. I met Tato when I was about 15 years old, and he wasn't, certainly, we were probably around the same age, and we were two neighborhood youth corps workers connected to mobilization for youth in the Lower East Side. And he hung out on Cherry Hill, and I was from Suffolk Street and Houston Street, and we were growing up as young people together in a very, very volatile time. It was the end of the 60s, the beginning of the 70s in the Lower East Side. Please don't take this in any wrong way, but Tato was a better politician than a poet.
Strategist.
Yes. He was the most amazing strategist. He knew politics. He taught me politics, along with Doña Petra Santiago and many others in the Lower East Side who would take youth and mentor them. And he was a mentee of the same people that I was a mentee of in politics. And he, before I knew that he wrote poetry, he was organizing and created with others in the Lower East Side something called New Jibaro Democrats. He ran candidates. I was obedient to that political voice. Liz, run for school board. Liz, go get those petitions. Liz, make sure that Jacob Reese has this flyer under the door on many, many issues. The oppression in the Lower East Side was such, particularly in the school wars in District 1. And that is where he cut his teeth. When we cut the lock at Jacob Reese and took over the community center, Tato was there, helping to do that. When we fought as insurgents against an oppressive political democratic establishment in the Lower East Side, Tato was the president of the club. He ran it. When he got love, but I have experienced Tato pissed off.
And he did say something bad about somebody. I heard it.
This is a whole aspect of Tato and the creative person that he was in poetry, but that experience and that process is what made AmeRícan and is what made him the poet that he became. And because he was able to experience that in the street, during the war on poverty, the Great Society, when we were all very happy, but the rug was pulled out from under. And all of a sudden we were standing with not very much and we had to fight for our own. There was Tato leading the battle. He kept me, I was his, he was my Pentecostal priest. He loved Pentecostales because they were who they were, and they sang and they moved and but he was also very priestly and very protective of the people that he loved and worked with. So I feel privileged to have known him. I knew him all of my life. And his legacy needs to also express that piece of activism which sets him apart from anybody else that I can pretty much point to, because he was there, he was hands-on, and he always loved his community, even to the last moment. So thank you for this opportunity, and I hope that Ruth will permit that piece is also part of everything that is the legacy of Tato Laviera.
You know, that's what I said to you.
Yes.
You forgot to mention some of the other authors.
Fine.
I mean that everyone in this room is the author. Because Papa based all of his poems on everyone in this room right now.
Wow. From the mouth of faith. That's poetry.
Yeah.
That's poetry. We are poetry. All of us. If I have a chance, I want to say something.
Absolutely.
Mi nombre es Angie Silva y yo soy la gitana de Tato, la gitana del pueblo, la gitana universal. Yo voy a tratar de ser breve, porque la historia de Tato no es larga, pero la voy a... Sí, por favor. Necesitamos 10 antologías para recopilar lo que es Tato Laviera. Sí. Y lo es, está aquí. Ese negro tan versátil, él nació poeta. ¿Quién dijo? Él sería un poco revolucionario, un poco de esto, un poco de aquello, pero verdaderamente él es un chamán y no lo reconoció hasta lo último. Él es un chamán y creo que aprendió de el profesor Miguel Garín, porque es de esa escuela. Somos unos dinosaurios, pero estamos aquí todavía. Yo con mi oxígeno hice un esfuerzo para llegar aquí, pero estoy aquí, estoy presente. Y siempre estoy presente en la vida de ellos. Eso es un popurrí. Tus pupilas en el tiempo, Tato, son castadas de trigo, caña, que es la dulzura, y lágrimas. Tus pupilas en el tiempo, cascadas de trigo, llanto y caña, se vuelven luminosas. Invierten mis deseos de seguir siendo poetisa. Tú vives en mí como yo en ti. Aprendí mucho y sigo aprendiendo de ti porque tú eres un espíritu liberto. Incomprendido bohemio. Sí, Tato Laviera, tú eres mi incomprendido bohemio. Versátil, sagaz. Me enseñaste que la vida, el teatro, la poesía y nuestra cultura es más intensa que la vida misma. Incomprendido bohemio, rompe cadenas de sueños rotos, rompe cadenas Desperdigados en el Padre Tiempo, espíritu liberto, a ti te amaré toda la vida. Tú sabes que el pueblo es poesía. Vas a una bodega, hay dos comadres, I try to be bilingual here. I'm Puerto Rican, I'm born there, I raised there and here. So cogí lo mejor de la cosecha. Háblame, hoy llovió. Dicen que cuando llueve, los espíritus se refrescan. Háblame, Tato, háblame como la lluvia. Háblame como la caña en cosecha, como cosecha de caña. Él adoraba su Puerto Rico y su negrura también. Yo me siento orgullosa porque a mi punto de vista, él no sabía que era Rican, Nuyorican o negro, pero negro de verdad. Y esa riqueza de esas culturas de él, eso me enamoré de su espíritu. Háblame como el pitacho del yunque, como la caña en cosecha. Háblame, Tato. Háblame como el coquí con su eterno kiss, kiss, kiss. Háblame como ese café colado, como ese ron pitorro que te gustaba probar. Háblame como la lluvia, mi hermano. Y al final de la jornada, morirás como yo, como todos los héroes y mártires de mi patria. Moriré con la cara al viento y enredada, arropada con mi bandera de una solitaria estrella, con mi bandera dominicana. Tato, esta noche he hecho un esfuerzo por estar aquí, pero te amaré por siempre. Tu genio, tu viveza y tu rico espíritu. Que Dios te bendiga, mi hijo.
Before we close, and there's some food back there, I want to say two things. One, that there are other people who work very hard on this book, who work in the production, and that one of them, of course, is Centro's publication director, Liz Ruiz, who took on this project and worked tirelessly. And the other two are the graphic designer, Kenneth Kaiser, who did a labor of love in designing the book, and the copy editor, Jonathan Lee. The book is on sale at that table at a special price tonight of $20, so if you want to acquire it, it's right there. Thank you very much for attending this event, and we will all keep Tato in our mind and our heart.
Oh, you want to take a picture?
Gracias. Acércate para que tengan la foto.
Acá atrás.